But yeah, I'm a lobbyist. I have to have a PowerPoint.
That's not the point.
It's required in a seminar. So thank you all. First of all, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for being here at the NARPM Legislative Conference. Before I dive in, I first want to acknowledge our governmental affairs team at NARPM. Of course, I'm Tyler. Many of y'all know me. Samantha Kinney, who's also on the call, is a huge, important part of our team. Frankly, GA stuff, it wouldn't happen. The trains wouldn't run on time without her. One of the smartest lobbyists I know. So it's somebody we constantly challenge each other and challenge our thinking in a good way. And so we're a lot better for it. Also, John Broadway, I think John is on the call as well. John is our regulatory advisor. And so if Samantha keeps us organized, and she's the person who actually is organized, not like me.
What kind of price point are we looking at?
Huh? Oh. And so,
hold on, I muted you. Let me unmute you, or you can unmute yourself.
All right. I'm good.
I just muted everyone.
I got you. John is the one who makes sure that we don't run afoul of the law and actually make sure that when we write regulatory letters, they say what we mean for them to say and not the opposite. So anyway, with that said, and again, I'm blessed to have the best lobbying team in the world around me, and I appreciate all of them, and I appreciate you all. This is just an update on where things are on Capitol Hill. I will preface it by saying most of this is all about COVID. I'll try not to go far down into the weeds on the things that Greg covered yesterday, who did a great job, is a great colleague and a teammate of ours on team housing up on the Hill. The one thing before we launch into COVID I will tell you about is we are still waiting, as a number of housing folks are, for HUD to put out their new disparate impact rule. If it looks like the draft rule that we saw late last year, as property managers, you all will probably like it much better than the original stuff that was out there. Originally, it was slated to come out in April. Of course, we know this COVID thing happened and put a fair number of things on hold. So as soon as that does, we'll let you all know, and we'll have some background on it. History of the world, I think we covered this yesterday. There have been 3 phases of COVID relief. Phase 1 dealt with mostly with SBA disaster lending. Phase 2 dealt with expansion of family and medical leave, sick leave, etc. Obviously, as business people, those are important, but they weren't directly geared towards property managers. The third, the CARES Act. I won't dive down through all of that. All of us know all that's in the CARES Act. We've been through it. But so that was the phase 3. That was actually the CARES Act was the third version, which brings us to where we are now. Phase 4. And with phase 4, the opening public salvo. Now, so I want to back this up a little bit because, a lot of folks have cast the HEROES Act as being the opening salvo from the House. Frankly, the messaging war started before phase 3, before the CARES Act was ever passed. Right, legislators who didn't think that the CARES Act went far enough in its various and sundry functions were already messaging the idea that this is good, but it's not enough, and we're going to need to be back here in a few weeks to do more. And with different legislators, what more meant could have different meanings. So that messaging, that fight, that positioning started then. Obviously, it kicks into earnest when the House passes what's called the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act was a largely, I think there was one Republican vote in favor of it. There were a handful of Democrats who voted against it. Part of them were the more progressive members who didn't think the bill went far enough, and part were some of the moderate some of those moderate flip seats from the 2018 election. For example, 2 of them right here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Representative Abigail Spanberger from suburban Richmond, Representative Elaine Luria from down in Hampton Roads, both voted against the bill. and again, largely those were so you had a group of moderates that didn't vote for it, and a group of, but the bill passed. And obviously, between us friends here, Speaker Pelosi wouldn't have brought it to the floor if she didn't have the votes. So she knew how many votes she could lose, and if she was coming up short, she would have found the votes. The speakers have the way of doing that. The HEROES Act, basically it represents the Democrats' opening bargaining salvo, right? So think about, not less as a property manager, think about, those of y'all who've done resale, think about this scenario where, and sometimes this is the worst case scenario, where you have a buyer who is a complete lowball buyer, and you have a seller who thinks they have the Taj Mahal, right? So they're going to want to list their home at $25,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 more than it's worth, more than it can fetch. The buyer's going to want to come in $20,000, $30,000 below, because they feel if I don't, in that opening salvo, if I don't ask for it, I can never go back. This is the same way that the legislation's. So this is the scenario we see here. In terms of the HEROES Act, the part that you all have read about, it very much dramatically extends the eviction moratorium, extends it to 12 months, extends it to all sorts of properties. But I will say there was something interesting and Sam and I caught this when we were reading down through it. When you actually read the legislation, all that bad stuff is in there. It's something that piqued our interest, and we're honestly are not sure why it was written that way, and we're trying to find that out. Is they took the late fee moratorium out. So in other words, we're going to extend the moratorium, but of course it's not clear then how would that apply. Can you start tolling late fees? And then, that's this, bill that shows up 12 months after the fact. And then also what was in there, we've all struggled in the CARES Act with that piece of legislation that says while the moratorium is going on, you can't file a notice to vacate, which, would be your notice to quit, right? Hey, you haven't paid rent, so leave in 3, 5, 14, whatever days it is in your state. Or it's the, we've warned you about, we've warned you about whatever XYZ disruptive behavior. You need to vacate in 30 days or 20 or 20, whatever the number is in your state. And you can't, right now, there are some property lawyers who say, wait, you can't even file the notice to quit for non-rent. And it was unclear. Some say you can. I noticed when they rewrote that section in here, they took that prohibition out. Now, the notice to quit language is there after the moratorium. So it cleared that up. Obviously, those are little positives that are far outweighed by the negative in it. So, but we know that the HEROES Act is dead on arrival in the Senate, right? Leader McConnell has basically said, we're not even taking it up. It actually, in some ways, I would argue this thing is a gift to McConnell because, he's been having some trouble keeping his caucus all unified on certain issues within the framework of COVID relief. This bill, gives McConnell and the Senate Republicans, and frankly the House Republicans, the straw man that they can all point at, because they might not be able to agree on some things over here, but they can say, we don't like that. So politically it was sort of but also it was something, that the House Dems needed to, for their political purposes, to put out there. As was mentioned yesterday, here are the deal breakers in the bill. In other words, here are the red lines that what has to be in the bill for the Dems to be able to support it, what has to be in there for the Republicans. For the Democrats, it's relief to state and local governments. For the Republicans, it is liability for protection for businesses that are reopening. Now, obviously, both of those issues can run at cross purposes with the other party, right? Democrats usually, traditionally have opposed legislation that would restrict the right of plaintiffs, i.e. tort reform. Republicans right now, or most Republicans in the Senate, or a number of Republicans, have expressed some concern about bailing out what they call blue state bailouts, right? They think this is money for California and New York, that they're bailing out what they see as badly managed blue states. So, but here's the here's just, Gianna, here's sort of this is sort of the stuff that Samantha and John and I do when we sit down and start counting numbers and inside calculus, okay? So first of all, McConnell has some Republicans within his caucus. Example is John Kennedy from Louisiana, who support bailouts for state governments. And obviously the way Louisiana's been hit, it's not surprising that he does. There are other Republicans who do. So he's having that challenge. But remember, for McConnell to get a bill, to get something that can pass on the Senate floor, he has to have Democratic votes. Unless you go the so-called nuclear option, you have to have 60 votes. So you have to have, just in the Senate, some Democratic buy-in. Pelosi on the House side does not have to have any Republican buy-in to get something off of the House floor. So in that calculus, favors Pelosi and the Dems. But on the other side, I would argue that the Pelosi and the Dems in general are more urgent for a bill to happen versus McConnell, right? So in some ways, in that sense, they have to come to him. So how that shakes out, we don't know, because we know also, right, some Republicans are getting a little nervous about the polls in November, and so there's this perceived need to do something. So basically what happens from here out is that the Democrats will, the Republicans in the Senate will probably put something out, some sort of, at least these are the things we can agree to. And we're going to spend the next few weeks, watching them negotiate this. So anyway, next slide. I went past the slide. So as that happens, here's what we're doing. Here are our asks. First of all, these are the asks that you'll be getting as talking points of what we're doing. And most of these, if you've taken action in our call to action, these are not shocking, right? Rental assistance for those impacted by the COVID crisis. But the way most of our problems get solved is if rent gets paid. Rent gets paid, right? Your employees get paid, your owners get paid, maintenance happens on the property, your business, your brokerage is intact. Several different ways to do that. And usually if you were in yesterday, right, the NAA has a perspective on how the best way to do it. Senator Trey from Senator Schatz's office had a view of how to do it. Of course, obviously, any eviction moratorium, we won't limit it to those actually affected by COVID, and no expansion of the moratorium. If you want relief based on COVID, you should have to notify an owner in writing, request assistance, give backup with that. Get federal law out of the business of dictating notices to vacate, right? That's landlord-tenant law. It should be a function of state law. Make it clear that you as an owner have the right to do an eviction. Even if there's a moratorium, you have the right to do an eviction for things other than non-payment of rent, right? The person who's getting the cops called to a house all the time, the person who's got the meth lab out in the shed, the person who has the illegal Tyrannosaurus Rex that they're calling an emotional support animal, those sorts of things. Making sure that any forbearance protections last as long as the time of any moratorium. And then, of course, if there's going to be some form of financial assistance to businesses, making sure that, because the forbearance is a nice thing, but a chunk of your expenses, expenses of where rent money goes, are things other like property taxes, insurance payments, and whatnot. So that comes to, oops, let me hit the correct button, how you can make a difference. First of all, participate in calls to action. I think most of y'all on this call, I think I recognize names. I know you have, whether it's at the federal, state, local level. We're going to be retooling one for this next phase of phase 4. So we might draw a little bit finer point. Participate in legislative meetings like this, like when we're setting up. So one of the things that we also are doing, is that we're setting up meetings with different offices on the Hill. Sorry about that. Make sure that doesn't happen again. I thought that was off. My apologies. We're going to be setting up meetings and are in the process of setting them up on the Hill. Some of you all may have already gotten, because there were some people that just jumped on it, and offices that wanted to have them like later this week, right? We have a few of those, and those have gone out to those of y'all in those states and delegations where they are. But a chunk of them are going to be week and a half from now, 2 weeks from now, and we'll be getting those out to you. Participate in the ones that are set up for your delegation. We'll be sending out talking points that you can use. And of course, as we set those up, we're reaching out to specific people within the delegation to make sure that there's a lead, a member who sort of runs the meeting, and of course you'll have a NARPM staffer on there, whether it's John or Samantha or myself. Volunteer at the chapter and national level. Right, the chapter, both state and local chapters as well as national, we need great volunteers. I can speak at the national level, not only our governmental affairs committee, but the subcommittees that Amanda Hahn, our chair, has set up. We're functioning, we're pushing a lot of stuff out, and those things work because we have great property managers who are a part of them. Of course, it goes without saying, invest in the NARPM PAC. One quote, I think, sums it up. For my Californians, y'all probably remember a Speaker of the House in the 60s named Jess Unruh, or called him Big Daddy. Big Daddy said that money is the mother's milk of politics, and that's true, right? Money buys you political presence, and that's what PACs do. That's just the fact of political life. Also, invest in the NARPM Advocacy Fund. That's what we use to cover the expenses, the administrative expenses of the PAC. It also helps defray some of the lobbying and advocacy expenses, things that you don't use PAC money for, and because it's not PAC money and it's not money that's intended for, there's money that's not used to be donated to candidates, you can give corporate money. And I know just the numbers I see coming on that, a number of you all have. And for those of you who have, thank you so much. So with that, because I want to make sure and leave plenty of time at the end for questions. I think we've got about 8 minutes or so. But I want you to have, first of all, that's my contact info. That's my direct dial, my email. But if you want to just contact the entire team, or if you want to volunteer, use that legislative info at NARPM, because that pops into both Sam and ours. So if you need to just get somebody on the GAD team and get them flagged quickly, that email address works well, because then whichever one of us gets it first, we can work with it. So with that, I'm looking in the chat box. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start with the one that's in the chat box. So since the bill, and I'm assuming this is the HEROES Act, will likely die, am I correct to believe that we need to go back to the House? If so, will all of Congress need to take a summer break until after the 4th, or do you think they'll go back for a rewrite and an emergency vote? First of all, that is correct. There will be some sort of vote of final passage. I don't know if it will be. So here's the one question, Claire. This question comes from Claire. I don't know if the Senate will pass a bill that will be basically DOA in the House. So in other words, and then they'll work it out, or will they work it out and it'd be like other bills passed on, and then the Senate will just vote on whatever the deal is. But yes, it will have to go back to the House. I think if they get a deal, my guess is, given the urgency of the House to get this passed, my guess is the Speaker will bring them back for an emergency vote. That's just my guess, but I don't know. But if there are other questions, I'm happy to answer them, provide any information that I can. Okay, this comes from Lori. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I apologize if I messed it up. What is the process for tenants vacating due to lease termination? The tenant refused to leave at the end of the lease. My lease just expires with no need to post a termination notice, but how does the CARES Act treat this? I've heard several different versions on it. Not being a lawyer, I'm not going to definitively say it's one or the other. I have heard attorneys who say if they refuse to leave, you cannot then file a notice to quit to get them out because you're initiating an eviction. I've also been on webinars where attorneys like that we trust in our industry who will say, you just need to just play, oh, your lease is ending. Yep, we thank you for staying with us and whatever. But if they stay, then that's when you're in the fix. And I honestly don't have a legal answer to a legal question. And I don't want to tell you to, because of, the way the law is written, you're not supposed to file something. So I think that I would say I think the trouble comes in when they don't want to vacate at the end of it. Yeah, Richie Henderson says tenants for life. That's right. It's interesting because it's tenants for death. Scott Abernathy, can you tell your team what a GAD team is? Yes, I threw out a flurry of initials and didn't define them, and I apologize. GAD is just a term in realtor, NARPM, other circles, government affairs director. And that's just the collective, instead of lobbyists, we like the government affairs directors. And so we just use the term GAD, and normally we just refer to our we refer to ourselves as just the GAD team. Michael Hodges. Okay. Oh, sorry, I almost skipped over Brett. Hey, Brett, good to see you too, man. Do you anticipate anything coming from the GOP to help landlords specifically? I wouldn't be shocked, if they throw us a few bones in their version of Phase 4. I would not be shocked at all. Michael Hodges, do you have a feel for the backlog in the court system due to the CARES Act? Ugly in a word. I was on a call today with some folks in Virginia, and Sam, please correct me. What did they say the anticipated backlog was? It 18,000 cases, or am I over?
I think that's what they said. Now you're making me question it. I think it was 18,000.
I was so shocked when the number, but as a colleague of ours who had been in touch with the Office of the Executive Secretary, I can only imagine it's the same in other states. Okay, from Paula, what can we do if the owner needs to take their home back due to their job loss and the lease is expiring in normal circumstances? That's the one in your state. I would consult your attorney for there's a fine line to walk there that you just have to be careful about filing or not filing the right paperwork in court that would get you a foul of federal law if that home is indeed a covered property. It's interesting because the CARES Act, I don't think from its design was really intended to completely get at situations like that. Although I would say there might be some nefarious folks who don't mind that it does. But in terms of just how to best navigate that, that's a legal question. That's if I gave you advice on it, we'd all go to jail. They would even come arrest me, John Broadway, Sam, everybody. So, and I don't look good in orange. So I would say just ask your attorney the best way to navigate that. Yeah, in some states you can't do anything. That's a good point, Heidi.
We have time for about one more question.
I'm glad somebody wants me to stay out of jail. There's probably people who wanted to put me in it, but thank you, Paula.
Great. Well, hey, any last questions, feel free to give them to Tyler. I'm about to post the Zoom link back to the main room where we can join everyone else. Thanks, Tyler, for such a great and informative presentation.